Welcome to Wordpath, the show about Oklahoma Indian languages and the people who are teaching and preserving them. Our topic tonight I've called Language and Identity, and I hope to have kind of a free-ranging discussion here with my guests, having to do with the cultural, political, and social aspects related to language. My guests are, first of all, on my right, Parrish Williams. He's a Ponca friend. He was on the Wordpath show once before talking about Ponca language more specifically. And he's also a leader in the Native American Church. And I'd like to welcome you to the show, Parrish.
Thank you.
On my left, we have Phil Pruner. He's a vendor of Native American music and gifts. He's very involved in gourd dance and other Indian cultural activities. And Phil, I think I'll let you explain your heritage.
Thank you, Dr. Anderton. My name is Phil Pruner. As I said, I'm an enrolled member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation, but I also have ancestors who were Kiowa, Delaware, Menominee, and Cherokee and Choctaw, and then obviously Prussian, French, and Scottish. So I frequently describe myself as a mutt when people ask me what tribe I am. But I think that's part of the problem we have in our culture today is the mixed heritage. And even as Parrish was mentioning earlier, he has Kaw and Ponca ancestors. So it's very hard to find people who are of one blood or one tribe anymore.
And that's one of the social factors that enters into language preservation, as we'll see before. Before we get into all that, Parrish, I wonder if you would do us a favor and tell us this story that your relative, Mr. McDonald, told about the coming flood. I think we'll benefit from hearing about that, if you would.
Yeah, a grandfather of mine, Tonde Nonkuge, that was his Indian name. There's a story behind that name, why he was named that. Then when he come to this Oklahoma, where we're at now, then we didn't come by us wanting to come here. We were more or less kind of forced. It's like the Cherokee, that Trail of Tears, that we have our Trail of Tears. Then we went to Quapaw country. They took us to Quapaw country, and it was too wet there, so we come over here where we're at now, located. Well, then when we, that was Ponca Reservation. Before, they called this Indian Territory, right, where they was going to have nothing but Indians in this Oklahoma. For some reason or other, well then, I guess, I don't know what the reason was, but then after they got all the Indians that they were going to move from their original reservations in the Oklahoma, well then there was some surplus lands. So I guess somebody said, by the way, just these surplus lands, well then we'll just open them up to settlement from the white people. Well, before that, I don't know whether my grandfather, now generally when they talk to their children, the only way they can get their attention is at a table while they're eating. Well, at this particular time when they was eating, and he heard about somebody told him that they was going to open this country here, the surplus land was settlement. He probably heard that somewhere. So he was talking to his children. Then he said, before they even turned them white people loose here, he said, now there's a flood coming. There's a flood coming. But he didn't say what kind of a flood, but he said there's a flood coming. Now prepare yourself, learn how to swim. He told his children, learn how to swim. And if you don't know, now that flood, it's going to just gradually come up. When it comes up, well, you're going to know that that river's rising, but you ain't going to be complacent. You're going to be doing something then it's going to come up. Now, after it reaches the corner of your mouth, then you're going to realize. But I'm telling you now, if you don't know how to swim, you're going to drown. Then, to try to save yourself, there'll be just a little grass floating down. You're going to try to grab it, but it's going to be too late because you didn't know how to swim. Then, what he meant by that, for the children get educated, I guess. Because if you don't have that education, you're going to drown. Now that's a situation we're in today now.
One of the things I really like about that story, Parrish, is probably he was thinking first of all about the land, but it's a very vivid image of someone in a river about to drown and grasping at straws, you know, and it can be interpreted in a lot of different ways, I think, as to different things that may be slipping away from you, your land, your culture, and your language as well, don't you think?
Yeah, when we come here, it was a reservation, no allotment or no, then he seen even that coming, I guess. Then, so that's what he was telling his children. Then my father was telling us, he always tell that story to us, his children, what his uncle was telling his, and he was there. Then it meant to us, the way he interpreted, he said that education, he stressed that education. Now, if you don't get that education, you're gonna, that's what he said, them being complacent. So now after he made that statement or made that talk to his children, well, they opened up that Cherokee Strip. Well, today now, what he said, that we had 108,000 acres plus. Now today we only got 12,000 acres of that. So what he said back there, that flood, now it's dripping in our mouths now. Now we don't know what to do, my people there. Now we don't get that, now that's my purpose now, but that's the reason I come here when you asked me to come here, to expose our plight to whoever will stop and listen to my people, because we need help today, Indian, because we're losing our language. Now like him now, he says he's different tribe, and that's where it is all over, even my people. I was talking to a group of children there one time in Ponk City. There was 2 Indian children in that group. So I asked this one boy here, I said, now what tribe are you? I don't know.
That's sad.
Then the next girl I asked, now there's a girl that, what tribe are you? She said, I'm Ponca and Tonkwall. Good, you at least know your tribe, but you can't talk the language.
Let me, again, kind of looking at the linguistic aspect of that, the language of it, let me quote a little bit from a friend that I hoped could be here tonight, Ray Nido, who's Comanche. He wasn't at the last minute, he wasn't able to get his travel arrangements together. But one thing that he really likes to talk about is language and his Comanche identity. And he says it's one of those things that's slipping away from us. And he says, I'm quoting him approximately, I think I'm doing his words justice though. He says, you know, we have to hold on to our language. It's the one thing that really, really makes us Comanche. And if we lose that, he says, if I don't have my Comanche language, I'm nothing but a brown-skinned white man, he said. Or other times he said, I'm nothing but just another Indian. In other words, it's very important to him to have that specific tribal identity that the language goes with. And now I'm going to use that, I think, to hand it over to you, Phil, because I know you have some other points to make about this. I'm sure you understand Ray's point of view.
Absolutely.
Now, let's hear some reaction and talk a little bit about your own position, maybe.
And as a matter of fact, that story that Parrish just told points out to me how much we actually agree with each other. We have been continually divided in this country. Now, I'm speaking of Native American people, have been kept divided in this country by an American government who has essentially dealt with us as individual tribes. And we've kind of fed into that in a way by identifying ourselves as Cherokee or Choctaw or Delaware rather than saying we're American Indians, we're Native American people. The federal government doesn't really care about the 2,500 members of the Epstein Shawnee tribe. That won't sway an election. But if we unite together as the American Indian people, 2 million votes means a lot of attention. And that's my concern right now. I believe we need to keep our traditions and our culture and our language, but keep it to ourselves. When we go to Washington, when we go into those courts, we need to be able to speak English. We need to have that education. We need to be able to speak in the judicial terms that they understand, because that's how they've always defeated us, taking our land away from us, taking away our rights, and that's going on daily. All of our rights, our privileges, our lands, our territories, it's being eroded pervasively and persistently in this country. So we have to stand united as one people. Are you
going so far as to say that you think Indian languages can be a divisive factor?
I'm concerned that anything that happens that divides us, that makes one person say, I'm a Ponca rather than I'm a Native American, causes us not to stand together. Parrish and I were talking earlier about the changes in the powwows. Powwows used to be kind of a family gathering, but they've changed to become something very commercial, almost an entertainment. Red Earth is a good example. It's not even American Indian anymore. It's an entertainment. It's a show that people go to. But back in the old days, well, not even the old days, within my generation, powwows were completely different than they are today. And I'm afraid that some of that is being used to divide us. We do need to stand together to maintain those political rights that we used to have and that are being taken away from us.
Right. I understand that. Now, Parrish, let me hand it back to you, because I've heard you say things, I think Phil's right, that he and you have a lot in common, and yet in some ways it's going to seem like you have a very different point of view, and I don't want to get you fighting with each other.
Well,
but I've heard
good.
you say, for instance, Parrish, that you used to go to powwows all the time, and you rarely go anymore except just to specifically Ponca powwows, Ponca dances. Can you explain about that a little bit?
Well, now, I was raised among, Indian tradition, custom. My grandfather, my grandmother, and they had dances, social dances, but just among group. Then this powwow come in. Now, the word powwow, there was written, I was telling, I call him nephew here. And my nephew, where it originated from the Call tribe, this word powwow. We used to call them doings, Ponca doings, Oto doings, Pawnee, and that's only 3 tribes that I ever went to. But my other Ponca people didn't go to them because my father had friends at Oto, he had friends at Pawnee that he'd went to school with, and he'd visit with them, and Ponca powwow. Well, then specifically, we went to Ponca every year. Now, just like what he was saying, now we had them just once a year. There was a reason for that. Now, back when, before they were moved down here, they had that sun dance. Then during the course of the, say that 11 months out of a year, maybe 11 months, 3 weeks out of the year, they were away from one another. So that the 4th month of the 12th month, or 4th week of the 12th, they'd come together, and that was in the fall. About this time of the year, they had sun dance. That was their a social dance, but that was a religious dance, that sun dance. So they come together for that purpose. Then that brought all the tribes, Poncas, from all over, wherever they were at, they all brought them to one area there around Nibra, Nebraska. Then at one time, my grandmother used to tell us there was 10 circles of the Poncas. There was a large tribe. But then they'd come and have that sun dance, then eat together, then all through that winter, because they come together to kind of lean on each other through the winter because it's going to be pretty lean. Then that's the reason why they come together. But when we come south here, well then instead of having the sun dance, now they took the sun dance away from us after we come down here. There's a story behind that one there. But then, so we had these dances, social gathering dances, war dances. Then they didn't have no powwows up till, I guess, about my people, about 19, when we first had the getting together in the summertime. Wintertime we had doings, Christmas doings we called them. Went down there. But then during the summer doing, well, I think it started there in Ponca, about long 101. They started everything 101. They're show people. So they had a rodeo in 1919, so they asked the Indians to come over there. Then my father was kind of involved with them people. Then they had that Indian dance there. And then that's where that championship war dance started from too. But then now the call started this word powwow, 1934, I think, about. But they didn't know they started that word. But then they had calls after Poncas come over there, that Emmett Thompson, He was a rich Carl. He had lots of money. And he built a grandstand, then had a racetrack. Wanted to have horse racing. It didn't pan out, so he called the Ponkers over there early part of the summer. Then they had that dance that first year. Then the next year, well, then they went back over there, and that's where that word powwow come in. Some reporter went over there and said, well, the Kaw Indians are having a powwow over here. Now that really describes what they were doing. Instead of going on the warpath and everything, so they described it as a powwow. So that same summer, my brother McKinley Eager, he was master of ceremonies over there, so he brought it to the Ponca powwow that August, and he called, now we're having a powwow here. He was telling the people so that word stuck. Now it's all over.
Now, was that about the time that different tribes started going to each other's doings, so to speak, or was that later?
No, it was just the Poncas.
It was still just Poncas
just
with their own?
Ponca powwow. It was just strictly.
Well, when did all of that start to change, where powwows became more intertribal?
Well, after World War II. After World War II. Now, World War II changed a lot of Indian customs, traditions, and everything. Because up to that point, but during the war, well, then they still had we had our powwow, then we had dances. But after World War II, well, then I don't know. It seemed like we changed courses and direction. Now we had that powwow, that polka, then we had that championship war dance, because my grandfather Gus McDonald he won that championship at the Haskell in 1926 when they dedicated that stadium. They had 7 young men over there to dance. They didn't call it powwow. They just called them Indian dancers over there to dedicate that stadium. So they went over there, and I guess they were all fancy war dancers. They didn't dance this what they call straight dancing. They cut up there, but there's mostly footwork. So when they seen that, well, why not get the best out of that and call him the champion? And it happened. My grandpa Gus McDonald won that championship. So we claimed that World's Championship War dance. And we used to attract people after 1950, them good fancy war dancers there. When we started that, well, then them other people started coming over because they had transportation. Then back there we had wagons to travel around in. But after World War II, well, then we had cars. After they start building them cars, and then they got the Model Ts. You bought them for about $100.
And we didn't have the $100.
So I guess part of people attending each other's dances and going to more intertribal events was actually a practical consideration, is that they could get around better as transportation improved.
Yeah, transportation. Now they could get around, go further now.
Right. Well, now, Parrish, I think I've heard you talk in the past about what a loss that was, because as you do more intertribal things, you lose the specific language in your songs. People sing things that don't have real words to them. Everybody's dances become more alike. In a way, there's a loss involved there, right?
Yeah, just like now my people, now this songs, these war dance songs they call, now they were, we don't have nothing in writing. Poncas, you can't find anywhere what we had, they quote us that we done this or we done that in writing. But we do have some important events that we want to keep then to tell our children, but they made songs out of them. Yeah, they made songs.
So that's part of what's in those songs.
That's our, them songs tells
so
our
that's how you keep track of your history.
Yeah, our history.
Now, Phil, let's have you react a little to this. If those songs are lost because people of many tribes are singing together, they can't all sing Ponca, they don't sing those words, isn't that history loss? Isn't that a loss to Indian people?
Well, no, because I think what we're confusing here is that the powwows were intertribal. And I remember reading someplace, powwows actually started after World War II, and it was a way of welcoming the veterans back from the war, and everybody was invited. But I'm certainly not suggesting that the Poncas still shouldn't have their ceremonies, their dances just specifically for their own people, just as my own tribe has Long Lodge ceremonies, green corn ceremonies, We do things ourselves just for our own people, but then we also attend powwows where everybody comes to it. And I think it's important that we not get confused, that we're not losing our identity as an individual tribe, but we need to establish an identity as a whole people too, for that political power. And language is political.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, I know, for instance, you are very involved in gourd dance, and gourd dance is spreading and becoming more and more intertribal. But you don't feel that that's a threat to specific tribal dances or anything?
No, because I think throughout our history, one tribe has donated or given things to other tribes, and we've all shared and we've all grown and become more complete as a people. I think you and I talked at one time that when the Europeans first came to this continent, there were only 2 major language groups in this continent. And Parrish was talking earlier about how the Iowa, or was it the there's 2 tribes, the Osage and their languages are very similar. And Parrish said he could understand some of them.
Yeah, there's 5 of us.
Yeah.
We could.
So a lot of these languages are very similar. I'm enrolled Potawatomi, but I'm more Delaware than I am Potawatomi. Potawatomi is very similar to Ojibwe. If you can speak Ojibwe, you can understand a Potawatomi and vice versa. And part of the problem I have right now is because we've got a Potawatomi language program that tends to separate us and say, well, we're different from the Ojibways, but we're not.
So when you talked about coming together that 1 month out of the 12, when everybody would come together for the old Ponca doings, you were talking about the unity within the tribe.
Within the
and Phil,
tribe.
you're not opposed to that, but you're also
Absolutely
emphasizing
not.
unity among tribes as Indian people for political power nationally.
Yes. The way that this government has always divided the Indian people is by dealing with them as individual tribes. There have been 2,000 treaties written, and those treaties have always been interpreted by the European-style government, by the Supreme Court, by the Congress, by the President. And until we learn to speak that language, they're going to continue to take advantage of us.
What do you think, Parrish?
Well, now, that subject, now, I was reading about a book here just recently that Susan LaFleche wrote. That in that, she said, now, these treaties that we've made, now, there's legal terms in that. Now, we talk, now, our language. A lot of those terms that they use in there, you can't interpret them.
Into Indian language.
Into Indian language. So now the interpreter, all he can talk is just that common everyday language. He can't, he doesn't know them legal terms that the attorneys use or the people that made that treaty. So they say, well, here's a treaty that we made. Then they read the way that they want to have it sound to us, to that interpreter. Then that interpreter tells my people, he doesn't know a lick of English.
Right.
Then this interpreter here, he doesn't know what he's saying because that's legal terms. And he tries to put it in legal terms. Well then,
Yeah.
because
language is not only political, it can be very dangerous.
it was dangerous to
Legally
us.
speaking.
Indeed.
It was dangerous for
Yeah.
us, yeah.
Let me bring up one more thing because our time is running out now, and that is plain sign language, the Indian Sign Language. Parrish, maybe you could demonstrate just 1 or 2 examples that you learned early in your life.
Yeah, like inside the teepee, now we use this tobacco. Then we have a leader. Now he's sitting over there, I'm sitting way over here. And I want to get his attention to make that smoke that tobacco. So I make this sign to him. Yeah. Then he'll make that same sign. What do you want? Then now we're talking with our hand. Then I'd make smoke. I want. Yeah, I want to make that smoke talk to
In
God.
order to pray. And I've seen this sign
Yeah,
a lot
then-
from people
then
of many
that-
different tribes.
Then that boss, he'll just say, ignore, all right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, we'll send it over there to you.
And what does this one mean?
But that's the good. Yeah, there's
Now-
2 ways of doing that. That other one, you cut yourself, I'm hungry.
Hungry, yeah. Cutting two.
Yeah,
A convention friend of mine says, I've
put
got
your
cutting
hand
two,
this
and I know
way, well,
he's
then
thinking
it's
about
good,
that
but
sign.
then you don't want to do this way because you're telling that man you're hungry.
Yeah. Now, Phil, I know you're interested in reviving plain sign language. How does that fit in with your philosophy about Indian unity and so forth?
Well, I think one of the points that I'd made earlier was that because I have such a broad tradition or ancestry of Native Americans, I'm enrolled Potawatomi. My son, who's 2 months old now, is going to be enrolled in the Western Delaware tribe. So which language do I teach him? Which language do we use at home?
Right.
We're going to have to use sign language, and that's what I hope to teach him. And I think that Parrish and I, with a little bit of practice on my part, could still learn to speak sign language, and that can almost become a universal language the way Hebrew is among the Jewish people or English is in this country. But I still think we need to be able to communicate with the government on English level.
Of course, there's a technical linguistic term called the lingua franca, which all over the world there are lingua francas, which are some common language or means of communication that people find to use with each other when they don't know each other's specific language. So in many parts of Africa, Swahili serves as a lingua franca among people of many different tribes. In this country, in fact, in modern times, the lingua franca among Indian people has been English. But if you can revive sign language, then you have a more Indian-identified lingua franca that might become available. And people in a situation like yours have something truly Indian that they can concentrate on that will not serve to divide them from other Indians. Am I with you on that?
I think that's a very important point. One thing that has always been important to me is the fact that even if we understand English, we don't always understand lawyer.
That's
and
true.
lawyers speak
There's
a
English and
different
there's English.
language than
Not only
English.
the speaking people
Well,
of
just
any
like,
background understand legalese very well.
yeah, that's a, I guess, our most pitiful point being Indian, not understanding. Now, just like this language here, well, then we could speak it daily, converse, but then to get into business language, now you have very few of my people, they try to go in business, but then when they get into it, well, they don't know that because that this language barrier, that.
I'm afraid we're running out of time. Parrish and
sorry.
Phil, my guests have been Parrish Williams and Phil Pruner. Thank you very much for, this is a good food for thought. We've given us a lot to think about.
It is.
I'd like to thank you for joining us on Wordpath tonight, and see you next time.
Hene yo hene na hene yo hene ana magwana kita wa pene manaone kita na hene yo hene na hene yo hene ana magwana kita wa pene manaone kita na hene yo hene na hene yo hene ana magwana kita wa pene manaone kita na hene yo hene na hene yo hene ana magwana kita wa pene manaone kita na hene yo hene na hene yo hene ana magwana kita wa pene manaone kita na hene yo hene na hene yo hene ana magwana kita wa pene manaone